So now that we're fully batteried up, we can crack on with instantaneous reserve deficits. And I've realised that I should have had contingent event instantaneous reserve deficits in all of the headings here, because we are not talking in any way, shape or form in amending the process for extended contingent events. And for those that aren't fully au fait with the wonderful verbose language that we use, the extended contingent event is simply would be like the worst thing that could happen in that island. So it's things like the loss of both poles of the HVDC, or during specific outages it might be the loss of say the 220 kV bus at Huntly, so we lose all Huntly generation. It's characterised as a very unlikely event, and because it is so unlikely, we rely on ORFLs or extended reserve to cover the bulk of that risk. And at times the modelling of the amount of extended reserve that is available to cover the ECE isn't enough, so we will schedule instantaneous reserve from generators or IL providers to cover the shortfall. We can't not cover the full ECE risk, because doing so risks cascade failure, and that seriously fails the what used to be the Campbell live test. So whatever, the project's not very scary, but you know, it's people in positions that they don't want to be in the national eye. So there's quite a few people. Ashley started the history lessons, so and we're running ahead of time, so I can indulge myself a bit here. So who remembers back before the current state of handling reserve shortfalls, CE reserve shortfalls? How did we make sure that the energy stayed supplied? Yeah, so Pete Osborne there, for the people online, correctly said that what we used to do was set the RAFs to zero, and the RAFs are reserve adjustment factors, which are basically an on-off switch for whether we were scheduling reserve or not. And so when we were running into situations where we did not have sufficient energy and reserve offers to meet all of the requirements of the system, we used to make sure that the energy stayed supplied by saying we don't want to have any reserve for the contingent event, and that meant that generators who had offered reserve as well as energy were able to provide maximum energy and therefore meet the energy requirements that were happening at the time. Now, Pete, what did that do to the price signals? What did it do to the reserve price?
There wasn't any reserve dispatched.
Yep, so the reserve price went to zero, and what did it do to the energy price, which was being co-optimised with the reserve price at the same time?
Came down.
Yep, it collapsed. And so we had a good physical solution, but we had a terrible economic signalling and outcome for market incentives and what have you. So as a result of that, there were changes made, which we'll talk through in a minute, but the main thing on this slide is to make sure that when we're talking about relaxation, that's not human intervention, that's the tools. So the tools have been given incentives and penalty factors, and so through the optimisation, it's treating those penalty factors equivalent to an offer, and it's simply coming out with the lowest cost solution. It doesn't necessarily look like the lowest cost solution because the numbers can get quite big, but it is the lowest cost solution. So when the literature that's come out about RTP is talking about relaxing reserve requirements, just to be clear, it's not a person saying, oh, we'll knock 20% off the corners, it's all right. It's the market system making use of the offers that it has and the penalty factors that it's been given for deficits, and working out what the best solution is, the optimal solution. And at the moment, that retains prioritising energy needs ahead of our CEIR requirements. So it does end up, compared to the counterfactual of collapsing both the energy price and the reserve price, the current system sends price signals, but they're not really prices, they're numbers. So it's better, but it's still not as good as it could be. And for those that are the full-on code nerds, if there is a contingent event reserve shortfall that is calculated in final pricing, the system operator resolves the infeasibility by adding in net free reserves, which is just keeping the system whole by pretending that some more inertia existed that didn't actually exist. And then that goes back to the pricing manager, and the pricing manager applies the virtual reserve provider provisions, which are, and Boudica will be able to answer this. What are they, Boudica? Not the detail, what do they do?
Oh, well, there's a new reserve offer at a particular price.
Yes.
Right, and that price is some multiple, I forget
Yep.
the exact multiple of a certain clearing offer in the
Yep.
relevant island.
Yep.
And that's an ex post tidy up though.
Yes. Oh, yeah. Oh,
It's like,
yeah. Yeah. Mea culpa, that's a shocker. Sorry. So ex post tidy up, and as thanks. As Boudica said, it's effectively a dynamic price cap. So the authority worked through solutions where there were reserve deficits and arrived at a formula to say what the value of this dynamic offer that doesn't actually exist until it's applied should be, and that goes into the solution. And what it's designed to do and what it does do is SPD is a thing of beauty, but at times that beauty isn't necessarily bound to the real world, and I think it was Contact in previous submissions have come up with the phrase mathematical oddities or something to that effect. So, SPD is working away to multiple decimal places and doing exactly what it's told, but that can end up in situations where there's a paucity of offers that it will have what, from a real world perspective, could be construed as creative solutions. And so the virtual reserve provider sits in there with a known, determined price cap, if you like, calculated from the offers, and that allows SPD to use that instead of anything else that it could do that's more expensive that was still feasible. And so that virtual reserve provider caps the reserve price. It may not even be used, but it'll cap the reserve price, and the co-optimization means that gets pulled through onto the energy side. We'll go through that in a minute. So at the moment, these are the constraint violation penalties. So constraint violation penalties are the prices that are incurred, or the costs that are incurred by SPD when it's forced to use something which hasn't been provided as an offer. The reason they're there is because if you didn't have something to enable SPD to have a solution, it's a linear solver. It'll run around in circles until it times out, and you can't have something in an operational environment that times out. You need to end up with a solution. So the way you do that is you give it some variables that it can use as a proxy to something that it would be using. So there's CVPs for transmission limits. There's the energy deficit, there's surplus, which is for when you end up with too much generation stuck behind a transmission constraint that SPD can't back off. There's CEIR deficit, so there's, I think, 13. The prices associated with them range from the 100,000 for the CEIR deficit CVP up to 850,000 for stopping SPD exceeding a ramp rate. And the main sort of things that it'll end up using is this one, the energy deficit at 500,000, or the CEIR deficit at 100,000, because by and large they're the cheapest way. If it gets backed into a corner and it can't come up with a solution based on the offers, those are the two primary ways that it can, and the two cheapest ways that it can get out. And we mentioned how generators that have offered both reserve and energy, the co-optimization there. So what you can end up having as a result of co-optimisation, there's two sort of main outcomes. One is that the risk will be brought down because the cost of reserve is so high, and you can get the energy alternately. So you can have a 400 megawatt CCGT offered at 1 cent, but it's only clearing to 250 megawatts, because even though that 150 megawatts at the top is only offered at 1 cent, you can go and get the 150 megawatts of energy elsewhere for $20, but the reserve to cover that 150 megawatts of risk will cost you $50. So the cheapest solution is to bring your big unit down, cap the energy, well, not cap the, but use the 1 cent offer there, use some reserve to cover it, and then on the other side you're getting the energy elsewhere as the cheapest solution. And with these two being the relativity between them, in short, it's 5 times cheaper for SPD to short reserve than it is to short it for energy. So when it's doing its co-optimisation, it's got these priorities that it's been given. So if it is able to, and it is forced to, and it's running out of offers, the priority given through this relationship is to go short for CE reserve rather than energy. And what it does do, though, is through that, the other thing it's doing is through that co-optimisation, the cost of energy in this case will be set relative to this. So if SPD is having to buy reserve at $100,000 to minimise its total cost, the risk station, the source of the risk megawatts, will be the marginal generator, because it's going to cost $100,000, because for every megawatt that pricing is roughly the plus 1 megawatt, what for the marginal megawatt, what happens next. So if you increase your output at the risk station, you need to cover that with an increased megawatt of FIR and an increased megawatt of SIR. And if one of those is costing you $100,000, then you can be pretty sure that SPD's cleared the cupboard of everything else that's real, unless someone in the room's got a cheeky offer in at $200,000. So in those cases, SPD will have cleared everything, and your energy cost will be the cost of the energy offer at the marginal plant, which will be the risk, plus this. So that's where we get $100,000 plus prices, and when you have concurrent FIR and SIR deficits, you get prices $200,000 and up. Is that all? It was a bit of a ramble, but hopefully there's a few nods. So why do we need to change anything under RTP? And the simple answer is that our lowest scarcity bid is at $10,000 proposed. By default. So we suddenly, we've got reserve deficits at 100,000, and we've got energy deficits at 500,000, and then we have a lower scarcity bid at 10,000. So if nothing was changed, when SPD was running into an inability to meet all of its requirements, it will satisfy those by clearing the lowest scarcity bids until it made the solution whole. And that, depending on the quantity, may align with load shed. So the signal that that's giving is that load shedding should occur. And obviously that's not necessarily an outcome that everybody wants. So what are we doing under RTP? Well, it's to be confirmed. So Justin's mentioned we're going to have a second consultation, and it's going to be most of the meat in the sandwich of that second consultation. My 8-year-old thought that was a better slide than... I think I need a different target audience when I'm practicing, not here. Sorry. No. But, and when I was reading this sort of sounded like a Trump tweet. There are lots of good ideas, and there are lots of viable options. So that's why we're confident to, because this is quite a central part of real-time pricing, is pricing in deficits. There are solutions, and it is definitely one that is worth engaging with industry, because effectively we're in the business here of trade-offs. And we'll go through those a little bit. So effectively you're trading off price signals versus physical outcomes. So how do you want to value CE reserve? should a megawatt of CE reserve be valued roughly equivalently to a megawatt of energy? If you do that and you're running into a shortage of offer situations, then the likely outcome, because you are saying we're going to end up effectively pricing the CE megawatt higher because we've got our CE IR CVPs have been brought down, so we're going to keep the prices roughly equivalent at that lowest tranche, then you don't have a lot of headroom for adding the energy offer on to the reserve deficit cost before you start exceeding the 10,000. So you're trading off sending, and I've probably got all the arrows on these two slides, so I'll just go to the next one, all the wrong way around, given that I had an ex-ante solution before. So what you're looking at is those trade-offs. If you set the prices high and you try and value reserve high, then the probable outcome of that is more scarcity bids clearing in the solution. If you set the reserve CVPs lower, you'll allow the risk station to be covered by more deficit reserve. You're less constraining the energy solution. You get more energy out the door, but you're not sending such good price signals to the value of reserve. One of the optimising experts within our organisation has the lovely little phrase that the value of reserve is the value of the energy that it supports. So by itself, a reserve megawatt doesn't really mean anything because it's only there to cover how you're getting your energy. So, and as the value of energy goes up, the value of reserve comes up with it. So I haven't explained that one very well, but I can catch someone at the lunch break if they want a better explanation of that one. We have investigated lots of options, or at least 3 options so far. So one is you change only the CE IR CVPs. So you could set them to 10,000. We went through and reran historical reserve deficit cases, and when we did that, if you had the value of your scarcity bid and your reserve at 10,000, then you got scarcity bids clearing, which you didn't have originally, because with the 500,000 and the 100,000, you do not end up with energy shortfalls, unless it's a very, very extreme situation. When you put reserve shortfall penalty costs and scarcity bids at about the same level, then there is a point where some of the cheapest way of keeping everything whole, as far as SPD is concerned, is clearing an increased level of scarcity bids. David Bullen, our expert, did some step change testing, and so to get comparable results, he was going $500 per megawatt bands. The CE IR CVPs, if they were set at 7,500, so 3/4 of the value of the scarcity bid price, then there was no energy shortfalls being signalled through clearing scarcity bids, and there was equivalent quantities of reserve shortfall. So that's one option. It's simple, and again, as we were saying, it's that trade-off, and a large part of this is for the industry to have a view on how you prioritise reserve versus energy, and not everyone will have the same view. One of the challenges also with this one is there are situations where you run out of sustained reserve, so the slower reserve, and the fast reserve at the same time. And so then the marginal megawatt of energy costs the energy offer plus the cost of FIR plus the cost of SIR. And so if you're trying to fit them both under 10,000, so you get equivalent outcomes to now, you end up tanking the relationship between reserve, or you sort of end up valuing reserve at half the value of energy. So there was a solution proposed where there would be a new CVP that would be added that would enable a better price outcome when you had FIR and SIR deficits running concurrently, when we ran that through some testing, it had some results which it worked for the problem that it was set up to solve. So when you had concurrent FIR and SIR deficits, it worked. In other situations, it didn't give such good outcomes, and chief amongst those was that the way that it worked was if FIR was in deficit and you added, so you incurred a FIR CVP penalty and the joint CVP penalty, the amount that you had scheduled as a FIR deficit, the joint CVP could be shared across both, so it effectively ported a price cap onto the SIR offers when SIR wasn't in deficit. So that's got a few quirks. And the last option that we looked at so far would be that you change the IR CVPs, as in the first example, but then you adjust quantities as well. And what we would be doing then would be stopping the throttling of energy that would happen without this adjustment by adding in some net free reserve, some more inertia, so that the CE risk source of megawatts wasn't being constrained by the shortage of reserve. And the goal would be to make that adjustment so that you still send all good price signals, but you have reduced the quantity of energy deficit such that it was at an immaterial level that you wouldn't actually have to enact. So going forward, and for that second consultation, the goal is to put out some example-based and comparative analysis. So option versus option, and there may be more options than what we've canvassed so far. And to say, so how does option 1 deal with this scenario, how does option 2, how does option 3, and run them through different scenarios, and also work through varying CVP, I shouldn't point down there, varying CVP values in all of those scenarios as well, to say this is the trade-offs, this is the outcomes, and then we could end up with something like this, and that these are entirely hypothetical, and that's why there's no names up there, and some ideas for how we could assess things. So the complexity of the solution, what price signals it sends, how it delivers on the physical side, so meeting energy, the cost of the solution, and picking up the comments before about market system outages, the predictability of the outcome. And we've also had that feedback around national markets. So there are some ideas that are theoretically great, but aren't that useful for people in the room who are running businesses, trading off them. So and just one last sort of comment, not quite a throwaway comment, but it's worth remembering that what's driving all of this is a lack of offers. So a lack of offers on the energy side and a lack of offers on the reserve side. So there are non-market system based solutions, but acknowledge that obviously there's commercial incentives why everybody doesn't have everything offered all of the time. And one last look at the big sandwich, so that you're all struggling for the adjective, but you're all disgusted. Disgusted. Satisfied that there is going to be a lot of detailed thought and engagement with the with the industry on this topic. So are there any questions? Excellent.
I have just one statement. To me, you want to keep the complexity down.
The key for me is keeping the complexity down. You've got people who traders who are going to be dealing with this in real time, trying to make rapid decisions and now be able to understand what's occurring. The last thing you want is something that's going to take them 2 or 3 hours to actually work through. So it's got to be, to me, complexity has got to be reduced to get the right signals and solutions.
No, fair point. Thank you.